Stephen Giles stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite, staring down at the city like a god surveying his kingdom. Beside him, his mistress Tiffany laughed as she traced a finger over the mahogany desk that had belonged to the company's founder for 50 years. Stephen thought he had won. He believed that erasing his wife Victoria from the company's history would be as easy as removing a painting from a wall. He thought the board of directors cared only about stock prices and his charismatic smile. But in the world of billion-dollar legacies, ink is thicker than water and silence is often the sound of a trap snapping shut. He was about to learn that you cannot steal a throne from the woman who built the castle. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel did not just sparkle, they seemed to judge. Beneath them, the elite of the city's business world gathered to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Fairchild Holdings. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts through the crowd, offering trays of champagne and caviar, while the air hummed with the soft murmur of deals being struck and reputations being weighed. At the center of the room stood Stephen Giles. He was a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin. At 45, he was handsome in a predatory way with silvering temples that he claimed gave him a distinguished look, though tonight his eyes were too bright, his laughter a little too loud. He gripped the stem of his crystal flute, his other hand resting possessively on the lower back of a woman who was decidedly not his wife. Tiffany Snow was 24, with hair the color of spun gold and a dress that cost more than most people's cars. The red silk clung to her, a stark contrast to the conservative black-tie dress code of the evening. She giggled at everything Stephen said, her eyes darting around the room assessing the jewelry of the older women with a mixture of envy and disdain. "You really outdid yourself, Stephen," Tiffany purred loud enough for the nearby CFO Arthur Pendleton to hear. "This whole party feels like a coronation." "It essentially is, my dear," Stephen replied, his voice booming. "Fairchild Holdings has been stagnant for too long. It needs new blood, new energy." Standing 20 feet away near a massive floral arrangement of white lilies was Victoria Fairchild. She was the granddaughter of the founder, the woman who had brought Stephen into the fold 20 years ago when he was nothing but an ambitious junior analyst with a cheap suit and a hunger for approval. Victoria did not look stagnant. She looked timeless. She wore a midnight blue gown that whispered rather than shouted, and around her neck hung the Fairchild sapphires, a set that had been in her family for 3 generations. She stood alone, sipping water, watching her husband parade his mistress through the crowd of shareholders and board members. Her face was a mask of porcelain calm. There was no anger in her gray eyes, only a terrifyingly sharp intelligence. Arthur Pendleton, a man of 70 with a spine as stiff as a steel rod, walked over to Victoria. He had served on the board since Victoria's father ran the company. "Victoria," Arthur said, his voice low and gravelly, "this is a spectacle, even for him." Victoria turned slightly, offering Arthur a faint, polite smile. "Let him have his moment, Arthur. Confidence is a heavy coat. It often tires a man out before the real work begins." "He's introducing her as the new director of marketing." Arthur hissed, his knuckles white on his cane. "He hasn't even cleared it with the board. He's bypassing protocol, Victoria. He's treating the company like his personal playground." "I am aware," Victoria said softly. "He sent the memo this morning. He believes that because the stock is up 3 points this quarter, he is untouchable." Before Arthur could respond, the music swelled, signaling the start of the speeches. The room fell silent as Stephen took the stage, dragging Tiffany up with him. The spotlight hit them blindingly bright. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stephen began, his voice amplified by the microphone echoing off the gilded walls. 50 years, half a century of excellence. When I took over as CEO 5 years ago, many of you doubted whether we could modernize. You thought we were too tied to the past, too tied to tradition. He paused, casting a dismissive glance toward the corner where Victoria stood. The room grew uncomfortable. The disrespect was palpable. "But look at us now," Stephen continued, beaming at Tiffany. We are expanding into tech and lifestyle branding. And that is why I am thrilled to announce that the future of Fairchild Holdings isn't just about legacy. It's about partnership. It's about vitality. I want to thank Tiffany, my partner in every sense of the word, for her vision in organizing tonight's gala. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The gala had been organized by Victoria painstakingly for 6 months. Stephen was publicly stealing her credit while holding the hand of the woman he was sleeping with. Tiffany grabbed the microphone, giggling. "Oh, stop it, Stephen. I just wanted everyone to see what the company looks like when it's actually fun." Victoria didn't flinch. She simply set her glass down on a passing tray. The sound of the crystal touching the silver platter was soft, but to Arthur it sounded like the safety being clicked off a gun. "He just erased you," Arthur whispered. "He stood on the stage your grandfather built and erased you." "He tried," Victoria corrected, smoothing the silk of her dress. "But Stephen forgets one thing, Arthur. You can repaint a ship, give it a new captain, and fly a new flag. But if you don't own the ocean, you're just a guest on the water." Stephen stepped down from the stage, flushed with adrenaline. He made a beeline for Victoria Tiffany, trailing behind him like a glittering shadow. The crowd parted, sensing the collision. "Victoria," Stephen said, his tone dripping with fake joviality, "I didn't see you back here in the shadows, enjoying the new direction." Victoria looked at him, then at Tiffany, who was smirking. "The flowers are lovely, Stephen," Victoria said, her voice steady. "Though lilies are usually reserved for funerals. Perhaps your subconscious is trying to tell you something." Tiffany laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Vicky. Stephen is just dragging this company into the 21st century. You should be grateful. You can finally retire and knit, or whatever it is you do." Stephen chuckled. "Tiffany has a point, Victoria. The board and I have been talking. The company needs a face that represents the future. We'll be discussing your role on the board at the meeting on Monday. Or rather, your lack of one." "Is that so?" Victoria asked. Her heartbeat didn't elevate a single beat per minute. "You've spoken to the board." "I have the votes, Victoria." Stephen leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and betrayal. "I have the numbers. It's over. Go home. Pack a bag. We'll discuss the divorce terms later." The word hung in the air between them. Divorce. Victoria looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time that night. She saw the sweat on his upper lip, the desperation behind the arrogance. "Very well, Stephen," she said. "I will see you on Monday." She turned and walked out of the ballroom, her head high, her back straight. As she exited, the heavy doors closed behind her, muting the sound of Tiffany's laughter. Stephen turned back to his admirers, raising his glass, convinced he had just slain the dragon. He had no idea he had just woken it up. The limousine ride back to the penthouse was silent, but it wasn't empty. Victoria sat alone in the back, but her mind was crowded with 20 years of memories and calculations. She took out her phone and dialed a single number. "It's begun," she said when the line connected. "Did he do it publicly?" a deep voice asked on the other end. It was Thomas, the family's private attorney, a man who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every cent. "Yes, at the gala. He introduced her. He claimed credit for the event, and he threatened to remove me from the board on Monday." "Predictable," Thomas said. "Stephen has always been a man who mistakes volume for power. Do you want to initiate Protocol B?" "Not yet," Victoria said, watching the city lights blur past the rain-streaked window. "Let him feel comfortable. Let him move his things in. Let him sign the papers. I want his signature on everything. When the trap springs, I want no wiggle room for misunderstandings." "Understood. I'll have the dossier ready for the Monday meeting." Victoria hung up as the car pulled up to the curb of the Fairchild building. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors, a marvel of modern architecture that she had bought with her own inheritance before she even met Stephen. When she entered the foyer, she found suitcases in the hallway. Not hers, his. and hers were next to the door 3 Louis Vuitton trunks that she hadn't packed. Stephen had beaten her home. He must have left the gala right after she did. He was standing in the living room loosening his tie while Tiffany was already walking around the room touching vases and sculptures as if she were shopping. "You're fast," Victoria said, closing the door behind her. Stephen turned a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Efficiency, Victoria. That's what I bring to the table. I told you I want this done." He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a thick envelope. He tossed it toward her. It landed at her feet. "Divorce papers," he said. "Cited irreconcilable differences. I'm being generous, Victoria. I'm offering you the beach house in the Hamptons and a monthly stipend. In exchange, you resign from the board immediately and sign over your voting proxy to me." Victoria looked down at the envelope but didn't pick it up. "You packed my bags." "Tiffany thought it would be best if you stayed at a hotel tonight." Stephen shrugged. "We're going to redecorate. This place smells like old books and dust." Tiffany piped up from the kitchen holding a bottle of vintage wine that Victoria had been saving for her son's graduation. "And we need to change the staff, Stephen. The doorman gave me a weird look. I want young people, attractive people." Victoria took a slow breath. This was the home where she had raised her children. This was the sanctuary she had built. "This apartment is in my name, Stephen," Victoria said calmly. "It was purchased before the marriage. It is not marital property." Stephen laughed, pouring himself another drink. "Check the papers, Vicky. Last year when we refinanced for the expansion of the Asian market, you signed a document consolidating assets to secure the loan. The penthouse is now a company asset. And as CEO, I decide who lives in company housing." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She remembered the papers. He had rushed her, saying it was an emergency that the deal would fall through if she didn't sign immediately. She had trusted him. That was her sin. Not stupidity, but trust. "So you're evicting me?" she asked. "I'm reallocating resources," Stephen corrected. "You're no longer a necessary asset to the company or to my life. You're a liability. You're a reminder of the past, and I am all about the future." Tiffany walked over and draped her arms around Stephen's neck, kissing his cheek loudly. "Just sign the papers, Victoria. Don't make this ugly. You don't want to be the sad ex-wife crying to the tabloids, do you?" Victoria looked at the two of them. They looked like characters in a soap opera playing roles they didn't quite understand. She bent down and picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She simply tucked it under her arm. "I will have my lawyer review this," she said. "You have until Monday morning," Stephen snapped. "If I don't have that proxy by the board meeting at 900 a.m., I'll release the audit." Victoria paused. "The audit? Oh, yes." Stephen grinned, his teeth white and predatory. "I had the new CFO, my guy, not Arthur, look into the charitable foundation you run. Seems there are some irregularities, missing funds, misallocated grants." Victoria went cold. The foundation was her life's work. It supported orphanages and art schools. It was impeccable. "There are no irregularities," she stated firmly. "There are if I say there are," Stephen replied. "And if I release a statement saying the wife of the CEO was embezzling from orphans, your reputation will be in tatters. The board will vote you out just to save face. Sign the proxy, Victoria. Take the beach house. Disappear." It was blackmail. Pure and simple. He had manufactured a scandal to force her hand. Victoria looked at the trunks by the door. She looked at Tiffany, who was now opening the wine bottle, spilling red drops on the white marble counter. "You are playing a dangerous game, Stephen," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a register that was almost inaudible. "I'm winning the game," he retorted. "Now get out." Victoria motioned for the doorman, who had been standing uncomfortably in the hallway, to take her bags. She walked to the elevator without looking back. As the doors slid shut, hiding the sight of her husband celebrating his victory with his mistress, Victoria didn't cry. She didn't scream. She took out her phone again. "Thomas," she said. "Change of plans. He threatened the foundation. He fabricated an audit. That was a mistake, Thomas said, his voice sharpening. He just crossed the line from civil dispute to criminal intent. I want the red file opened, Victoria said, stepping out into the cold night air. And contact the private investigator. I want photos of Tiffany. I want her credit history, her past employment, everything. If he wants to talk about irregularities, let's show the board what a real irregularity looks like. She got into the waiting taxi. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. The Ritz-Carlton, Victoria said. And then to the office of Arthur Pendleton. I have a war to plan. Back in the penthouse, Stephen toasted to the city view. To us, he said. To us, Tiffany giggled. And to getting rid of the dead weight. They drank, unaware that the dead weight was currently the only thing keeping the entire building from collapsing on top of them. Monday morning was 36 hours away, and Victoria Fairchild was done being polite. Sunday at the Fairchild Holdings headquarters was usually a day of silence, a time when the servers hummed quietly and the cleaning crews polished the marble floors of the lobby. But this Sunday, the 34th floor, the executive level, was chaotic. Stephen had decided that Monday's board meeting would not just be a vote, it would be a reveal of the new Fairchild. He had brought Tiffany in to revamp the energy before the directors arrived the next morning. This gray is depressing, Tiffany complained, gesturing at the walls of the executive reception area. She was wearing a white tennis outfit despite having never played a set in her life, holding a latte that she had already let go cold. It feels like a library. We need color. We need zest. Mrs. Higgins, the executive assistant who had served 3 generations of Fairchild CEOs, sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly over her keyboard. She was 62, a woman of immense dignity and capability who knew where every body was buried and every contract was filed. Mr. Giles, Mrs. Higgins said, her voice tight. These walls are paneled in French walnut. They were installed by Victoria's grandfather. You can't just paint over them. Stephen didn't even look up from his tablet. Tiffany is the new creative director, Mrs. Higgins. If she says paint it, paint it. In fact, get a crew in here today. Triple time pay. I want it bright orange or, what was the color, Tiff? Electric lime. Tiffany beamed. It screams innovation. Mrs. Higgins stood up slowly. Sir, with all due respect, that is impossible on a Sunday. And it would violate the building's historical preservation code. Tiffany rolled her eyes, turning to Stephen. See, this is what I'm talking about, baby. This negative energy, it's blocking the flow. How can you lead a billion-dollar company with a gatekeeper who says no to everything? Stephen finally looked at Mrs. Higgins. He saw her gray hair, her sensible cardigan, her look of disapproval. He didn't see the woman who had reminded him of his mother's birthday every year, or who had covered for him when he missed meetings. He saw the past. You're right, Stephen said. He walked over to Mrs. Higgins's desk. Pack your things, Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins froze. Excuse me. You're fired. Stephen said loud enough for the skeleton crew of junior analysts in the bullpen to hear. Severance is 2 weeks. Leave your badge on the desk. You cannot be serious, Mrs. Higgins whispered. I manage the board's schedule. I have the minutes for tomorrow's meeting. I have the proxy votes. I'll handle the proxies, Tiffany said, snatching a folder from the desk. How hard can it be? It's just organizing paper. Mrs. Higgins looked at Stephen one last time. There was no pleading in her eyes, only a profound pity. You are making a mistake, Stephen, a fatal one. Security! Stephen barked into the intercom. 2 guards arrived and escorted a weeping Mrs. Higgins out of the building. As she left, she didn't go home. She went straight to a payphone 2 blocks away. She didn't trust her cell phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. He fired me, Victoria, she said, her voice breaking. On the other end of the line, Victoria was sitting in Arthur Pendleton's study, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound ledgers. Her face hardened. He fired you, Victoria asked, her voice deadly calm. Yes, and he gave Tiffany the proxy folder, the one with the irrevocable trust documents. Victoria's eyes snapped to Arthur. He gave the mistress the trust documents. Arthur, pouring tea, nearly dropped the pot. What that folder contains the founder's seal. If that gets lost or damaged. Mrs. Higgins, Victoria said, go home. Rest. You are not fired. In fact, you just got a raise. But I need you to do one thing for me. Did you back up the server logs from Friday night? I always do, ma'am. On the external drive in the safe deposit box. Good. Bring that to the meeting tomorrow. And wear your best suit. You're going to be sitting next to me. Back in the office, disaster was unfolding. Tiffany, bored with the painting idea after realizing crews wouldn't come on a Sunday, had started organizing the files. She was shredding things she deemed old and dusty. What's this? She asked, holding up a yellow document. Memorandum of Understanding 1985 boring. Shred. Stephen was busy on a call with a potential investor from Dubai trying to secure capital to buy out the remaining board members. Yes, the wife is out. Stephen lied smoothly. It's a complete restructuring. I have full control. The board is effectively a rubber stamp at this point. He didn't notice that Tiffany had just shredded the original hard copy of the company's D&O directors and officers liability insurance policy. He didn't notice that the electric lime paint swatch she left on his desk was resting on top of a subpoena from the SEC regarding a trade Stephen had made 3 months ago, a subpoena Mrs. Higgins had been preparing to show him. He hung up the phone feeling like a king. Tiff, baby, he called out. Get the champagne from the mini-fridge. We're going to celebrate. The Arabs are interested. Tiffany sashayed over, kicking a pile of files under the rug. I'm so good at this business stuff, Stephen. We should be a power couple on the cover of Forbes. We will be, Stephen promised. After tomorrow morning, Victoria will be nothing but a footnote, and we will be the headline. They toasted, oblivious to the fact that they were standing in a graveyard of their own making. Monday morning broke with a gray, relentless rain that battered the glass facade of the Fairchild Tower. The atmosphere inside the building was electric with anxiety. Rumors of Mrs. Higgins's firing had spread through the company WhatsApp groups like wildfire. Staff members kept their heads down, typing furiously, afraid to make eye contact with the executive suite. At 8:45 a.m., the board of directors began to arrive. These were not young tech disruptors in hoodies. These were titans of industry. There was George Hamilton, a man who owned half the shipping lanes in the Atlantic. There was Margaret Dean, the steel magnate who had never smiled in a photograph. And there was Arthur Pendleton, looking frail but wearing a suit that cost more than Stephen's car. They gathered in the boardroom, a cavernous space dominated by a 20-foot table made of solid oak. At the head of the table sat Stephen. He was perfectly groomed, wearing a navy bespoke suit. Tiffany sat to his right, wearing a business suit that was cut just a little too low for a boardroom, tapping away on her phone. Gentlemen, Margaret! Stephen nodded as they took their seats. Welcome. I see we have a full house. Where is Victoria? George Hamilton asked, his voice booming. The chairwoman is always present for the quarterly review. There have been changes, Stephen said, clasping his hands. Victoria is taking a leave of absence. Personal health reasons. The stress of the divorce, you understand. It's very sad. Arthur Pendleton didn't look up from his notepad. I spoke to Victoria yesterday. She seemed in excellent health. Stephen's smile didn't waver, but his eyes tightened. Denial is a stage of grief, Arthur. But we have business to discuss. As you know, I am calling for a vote of confidence today. I am also proposing a restructuring of the voting shares to streamline decision-making. Basically, I will be absorbing Victoria's seat. You can't absorb a seat without a supermajority, Margaret Dean stated dryly. And you don't have the votes, Stephen. Actually, Stephen motioned to Tiffany. I have the proxies right here. The absent shareholders have given me their authority. Tiffany handed him a folder. It was thin. Too thin. Stephen opened it. He frowned. It contained only menu options for the lunch catering. Tiffany, he whispered harshly, where are the proxy forms? They were in the blue folder, she whispered back, confused. Or maybe the yellow one I cleaned up yesterday, remember? Panic flared in Stephen's chest. Without those proxies, he only controlled 30% of the vote. He needed 51%. Minor clerical error, Stephen announced, sweating slightly. We can proceed with the audit report. As you know, we discovered significant embezzlement within the Fairchild Foundation managed by my estranged wife. This alone is grounds for her removal from the board. He pressed a button on the remote. The projector screen descended. I have the forensic accounting right here, Stephen said, pointing to the screen. Millions siphoned off into offshore accounts. The screen flickered. But instead of a spreadsheet, a video started playing. It was grainy security footage. The timestamp was from Sunday yesterday. It showed Tiffany sitting at Mrs. Higgins' desk feeding documents into the shredder while taking a selfie. The board watched in silence. That's... Stephen stammered. That's the wrong file. Is it? A voice rang out from the back of the room. The heavy double doors swung open. Victoria Fairchild stood there. She was not wearing the soft, elegant dresses she usually favored. Today she wore a sharp charcoal pantsuit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, sleek bun. Behind her stood Mrs. Higgins holding a thick briefcase. And behind Mrs. Higgins were two men in dark suits, federal agents. You're late, Stephen sneered, trying to regain control. And you're trespassing. I told you, Victoria, you're off the board. Victoria didn't shout. She walked into the room, the sound of her heels clicking on the floorboards like the ticking of a clock. She walked past the stunned board members, past Tiffany, who was shrinking in her seat, and stood at the opposite end of the table from Stephen. I am not off the board, Stephen, she said, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone, because you cannot fire the owner. I am the CEO, Stephen shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I run this company. You run the operations, Victoria corrected. But you seem to have forgotten who owns the Class A preferred shares. The shares my grandfather left to me. The shares that carry 10 votes for every one of yours. You signed those over, Stephen yelled. The refinancing deal. No. Victoria smiled a cold, terrifying expression. I signed the loan guarantee. I did not sign the share transfer. You would have known that if you hadn't fired the only woman in this building who bothers to read the fine print. She nodded to Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins stepped forward and placed a document on the table. The original charter, Mr. Giles, Clause 14. In the event of executive misconduct or moral turpitude, the founder's heir retains the right to dissolve the sitting CEO's contract immediately without severance. The room went dead silent. Moral turpitude. Stephen laughed nervously. Because I have a girlfriend. This isn't 1950 Victoria. The board doesn't care who I sleep with. They don't, Victoria agreed. But they do care about insider trading. She gestured to the federal agents. Stephen Giles, the taller agent said, stepping forward. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the manipulation of stock prices in the Asian expansion project and the falsification of audit documents to blackmail a corporate officer. Stephen's face went white. He looked at Tiffany. You shredded the insurance. You said you shredded the old stuff. I don't know what's happening, Tiffany shrieked, grabbing her purse. I'm just the creative director. Actually, Victoria said, looking at Tiffany with mild amusement, you're an accomplice. The agents have photos of you destroying subpoenaed evidence yesterday. Mrs. Higgins recovered the digital logs. George Hamilton stood up, his face red with fury. Stephen, is this true? Did you fabricate an audit against the Foundation? Stephen looked around the room. He saw no allies, only the cold stares of men and women who valued profit and reputation above all else. He looked at Victoria. She wasn't looking at him with hate. She was looking at him with nothing. He was already gone to her. Stephen choked. It was a strategy, a negotiation tactic. It was a felony, Victoria said. Board members, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the CEO effective this second. Seconded, Arthur Pendleton said instantly. All in favor, Victoria asked. Every hand in the room went up, even the people Stephen thought he had bought. Motion carried, Victoria said. She looked at the agents. Please remove him from my building. Wait! Stephen screamed as the agents grabbed his arms. You can't do this. I built this company's stock. I made you rich. My grandfather made me rich, Victoria said, turning her back on him to look at the view of the city, the same view Stephen had claimed as his own just 2 nights ago. You just made me tired. As they dragged Stephen out kicking and shouting, Tiffany tried to slip out behind them. Sit down, Tiffany, Victoria said, not even turning around. We haven't discussed the company credit card you've been using all weekend. That's grand larceny. We have a lot to talk about. Tiffany slumped into the chair, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. The boardroom was quiet again. Mrs. Higgins, Victoria said softly. Please call the secretary. We need to draft a press release. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Mrs. Higgins said, taking her rightful seat at the table. But the story wasn't over. Stephen wasn't a man to go down without burning the house down, and even from a jail cell, he had one last card to play a secret he had kept hidden in the Cayman Islands that could still ruin them all. The arrest of Stephen Giles was the lead story on every financial news network from New York to London. Footage of the charismatic CEO being led out of the Fairchild Tower in handcuffs played on a loop in the lobby of the very building he used to command. But up on the 34th floor, there was no time to watch the news. Victoria sat at the head of the oak table, which was now covered in take-out coffee cups and stacks of legal briefs. It had been 48 hours since the board meeting, and she had not slept. The initial victory of removing Stephen had been sweet, but the aftertaste was bitter. The company's stock had plummeted 12% upon the news of the arrest. Investors hated uncertainty, and nothing screamed uncertainty like a CEO being dragged away by federal agents. We have stabilized the immediate bleeding, Arthur Pendleton said, rubbing his tired eyes. The press release regarding your return as interim CEO has calmed the major shareholders. But we have a problem, Victoria, a massive one. Victoria looked up from a spreadsheet. What is it? Arthur, did the SEC freeze our accounts? No, Arthur said grimly. It's the cloud servers, specifically the proprietary algorithm for our logistics division, the Fairchild Flow system. The Fairchild Flow was the jewel of the company. It was an AI-driven logistics program that managed shipping routes for clients globally. It generated 40% of the company's annual revenue. What about it? Victoria asked. It's locked, the head of it, a nervous man named David interjected. At midnight last night, the system initiated a countdown. It's asking for a biometric encryption key, specifically Stephen's retina scan, and a localized password. If the key isn't entered within the next 24 hours, the system is programmed to execute a purge command. Victoria went cold. A purge command. It will delete the source code, David explained, his voice trembling. It will wipe the client data, the history, everything. We don't have a localized backup because Stephen ordered the backups moved to a remote server last month, a server we can't access. It's a dead man switch, Victoria realized. He knew he might get caught. He rigged the company to blow up if he was removed. He wants to negotiate, Arthur said, sliding a visitation request across the table. His lawyer called. Stephen says he will give us the code to stop the purge. But he has demands. Victoria stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in her blazer. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He thinks he still has leverage, she said. I'm going to the detention center. Victoria, you can't, Arthur protested. Let the lawyers handle it. No, she said, picking up her purse. He needs to see me. He needs to see that I am not afraid of him. And I need to see exactly how desperate he is. The federal detention center in Lower Manhattan was a stark contrast to the luxury of the penthouse. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale despair. Victoria sat on a metal stool on one side of the reinforced glass. On the other side, Stephen was brought in. He looked terrible. His bespoke suit had been traded for an orange jumpsuit. His silver hair was unkempt, and the arrogance that usually defined his face was replaced by a frantic, cornered look. But when he saw Victoria, he forced a smirk. "You look tired, darling," Stephen said into the receiver. "Heavy is the head that wears the crown, isn't it?" "Cut the pleasantries, Stephen," Victoria said, her voice tinny through the phone. "The flow system. Give me the code." Stephen leaned back, crossing his arms. "I don't think so. That code is my insurance policy. Here is the deal, Victoria. You drop the internal charges. You tell the board it was a misunderstanding. You refuse to cooperate with the SEC. You get me out of here and I give you the code. If not, at noon tomorrow, Fairchild Holdings loses its core product. The stock goes to zero. You lose everything your grandfather built." Victoria stared at him. "You would destroy the company. You would bankrupt thousands of employees just to save yourself." "I am the company," Stephen hissed, slamming his hand against the glass. "I built that algorithm. I modernized this dinosaur. If I can't run it, nobody runs it." "You didn't build it," Victoria corrected calmly. "Our engineers built it. You just slapped your name on the patent." "It doesn't matter," Stephen sneered. "I control it. You have—" He glanced at the clock on the wall. 18 hours. Get me a bail hearing, Victoria, or watch it burn." Victoria looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He truly believed he was the victim. "I won't negotiate with a terrorist, Stephen. Not even one I used to be married to." "Then say goodbye to your legacy." Stephen laughed. It was a hollow, manic sound. "Oh, and tell Tiffany I said hello. I assume she's weeping in a cell somewhere." Victoria paused. Something in his tone, the way he mentioned Tiffany, triggered a thought. It was dismissive yet specific. "Tiffany is cooperating," Victoria lied smoothly. Stephen's eye twitched, just a fraction. "She knows nothing. She's a prop, a pretty distraction." "She knows enough," Victoria said, standing up. "Enjoy your lunch, Stephen. I hear the bologna is exquisite." She hung up the phone and walked out, her heart racing. Stephen was right about one thing: the clock was ticking. But his reaction to Tiffany's name had given her a thread to pull. Stephen was a narcissist. Narcissists use people. He used Tiffany for pleasure, yes, but Stephen never did anything without a second angle. Why did he have Tiffany shredding documents? Why was she so involved in his private office dealings? Victoria pulled out her phone as she stepped into the rain. "Mrs. Higgins," she said, "where is Tiffany Snow being held?" "She made bail an hour ago," Mrs. Higgins replied. "Her father put up his house. She's at the Four Seasons trying to hide from the paparazzi." "Meet me there," Victoria commanded. "And bring the forensic audit regarding the offshore accounts Stephen mentioned. I have a theory." The suite at the Four Seasons was a mess of room service trays and designer tissue boxes. Tiffany Snow sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and puffy, scrolling through social media, where she was currently being branded the most hated woman in New York. When the knock came at the door, she jumped. "Go away," she screamed. "I'm not giving interviews." "It's Victoria Fairchild," a voice came through the wood. "Open the door, Tiffany, or I call the FBI and tell them you're a flight risk. They'll revoke your bail." The door opened a crack. Tiffany peered out, looking small and terrified. She opened the door fully. Victoria walked in, followed by Mrs. Higgins, who looked around the messy room with disdain. "I didn't know," Tiffany blubbered immediately. "I swear, Victoria, Stephen told me those papers were just old duplicates. I didn't know I was committing a crime. I just wanted to be the creative director." Victoria sat in the armchair, crossing her legs. "Sit down, Tiffany." Tiffany sat on the bed, clutching a pillow. "Stephen has rigged the company servers to delete themselves in 12 hours, Victoria stated plainly. "He won't give up the code unless I set him free, which I won't do." "He's a monster," Tiffany sniffled. "He called me from jail. He blamed me. He said I was sloppy." He used you, Victoria said. But I think he used you for more than just shredding paper. Mrs. Higgins, the file. Mrs. Higgins opened a folder and handed Victoria a document. We looked into the remote server where the backups are stored, Victoria said. It's hosted by a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Ventures. That company holds the intellectual property rights to the encryption key. I don't know what that means, Tiffany said blankly. It means, Victoria continued leaning forward, that whoever owns Blue Horizon Ventures owns the key to saving my company. Now Stephen is arrogant, but he is also paranoid. He wouldn't put his own name on an illegal offshore shell company while the SEC was investigating him. That would be too easy to trace. Victoria pulled out a photocopy of the incorporation papers for Blue Horizon Ventures. He needed a nominee, Victoria said. Someone he could control. Someone he thought was too naive to understand what they were signing. Someone he trusted implicitly, or rather someone he thought was too stupid to betray him. She tossed the paper onto the bed. Look at the signature of the sole director, Tiffany. Tiffany picked up the paper. Her eyes went wide. That's my signature. Exactly, Victoria said. He made you the owner of the shell company. He probably slipped this in with a stack of other things, lease agreements, car insurance. The prenup, Tiffany whispered. He made me sign a prenuptial intent document a month ago. He said it was to protect me. There were so many pages. And you signed them all without reading Mrs. Higgins noted dryly. So, Victoria stood up. Here is the situation. Legally, you own the company that is holding my data hostage. You are the director of Blue Horizon Ventures. Tiffany looked at the paper, her hands shaking. Does that mean I'm in more trouble? It depends, Victoria said. If you do nothing, you are an accomplice to corporate sabotage and extortion. You will go to federal prison for 10 to 15 years. Tiffany let out a strangled sob. However, Victoria stepped closer, her voice softening just a fraction. If you exercise your right as the sole director to transfer the assets of Blue Horizon Ventures back to Fairchild Holdings, well then you become the hero. You become the whistleblower who helped the victimized company recover its stolen property. I will speak to the district attorney. We can get the charges reduced to a misdemeanor. Probation. No jail time. Tiffany looked up, hope dawning in her tear-filled eyes. You would do that after? After I stole your husband. Victoria looked at the young woman. She didn't see a rival anymore. She saw a casualty of Stephen's war. You didn't steal him, Tiffany. You just caught him while he was falling. I don't want revenge on you. I want my company safe. Do we have a deal? Yes, Tiffany said, grabbing a pen from the nightstand. Where do I sign? I hate him. I want to burn him down. Mrs. Higgins has the transfer of ownership documents right here, Victoria said. For the next 20 minutes the room was silent, except for the scratching of a pen. Tiffany signed document after document transferring the server access, the IP rights, and the encryption keys back to Fairchild Holdings. When the last page was signed, Mrs. Higgins pulled out her laptop. She connected to the company's secure network. Accessing the Blue Horizon remote terminal, Mrs. Higgins narrated, inputting the director's override code, authenticated, disabling the purge command. A loading bar appeared on the screen. Victoria held her breath. Command accepted. Purge canceled. Data restored. Mrs. Higgins looked up and smiled a rare, genuine smile. It's done. The system is safe. Victoria let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 days. Thank you, Tiffany, Victoria said. My lawyers will be in touch regarding your plea deal. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. One piece of advice, Victoria said. Next time a man tells you that you are his partner, make sure he isn't just handing you the shovel to dig your own grave. Victoria and Mrs. Higgins walked out of the hotel and into the waiting town car. Where to now, ma'am? The driver asked. Back to the office, Victoria said. I have a company to run. And Mrs. Higgins? Yes, Victoria. Send a message to the detention center. Tell Stephen that the board accepts his resignation. And let him know that Blue Horizon Ventures has been dissolved. I want him to know exactly who beat him. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Manhattan was surrounded by a sea of reporters. It was the final day of United States v. Stephen Giles, a trial that had captivated the business world. The Fairchild fraud, as the tabloids called it, had exposed the dark underbelly of corporate ambition. Inside the courtroom, Stephen sat at the defense table. The months in confinement had not been kind to him. He had lost 20 pounds, and his once immaculate silver hair was thinning and dull. He wore a cheap suit provided by his public defender. His assets had been frozen, and no top-tier firm would touch his toxic case. He still clung to a shred of arrogance, believing that he could talk his way out of this. He believed he was the smartest man in the room. The prosecution calls its final witness, the district attorney announced. Ms. Tiffany Snow. Stephen's head snapped up. He hadn't seen Tiffany since the day of his arrest. He expected her to be a wreck to plead the fifth or to be too incompetent to testify effectively. But the woman who walked to the stand was different. She wore a modest gray dress, her makeup was minimal, and she held her head high. She didn't look at Stephen. Ms. Snow, the prosecutor began, can you tell the court who instructed you to sign the incorporation papers for Blue Horizon Ventures? Stephen Giles did, Tiffany said clearly into the microphone. He told me it was part of our prenuptial agreement. He told me it was to protect our future. I didn't know it was a shell company used to hide stolen intellectual property. Objection, Stephen's lawyer shouted. Hearsay. Overruled, the judge said. And what did you do with the assets of this company when you discovered the truth? The prosecutor asked. I transferred them back to their rightful owner, Tiffany said, finally turning to look at Stephen. Her eyes were cold. I returned the encryption keys to Victoria Fairchild because I refused to be a pawn in his game anymore. Stephen's face went purple. He stood up, knocking his chair over. You traitor, I made you. You were nothing before me. Sit down, Mr. Giles, the judge barked, slamming the gavel. She's lying, Stephen screamed, losing all control. She's too stupid to do that. It was Victoria. She manipulated her. Mr. Giles, one more outburst and you will be held in contempt. But the damage was done. The jury saw the real Stephen Giles, not the charming CEO, but the abusive, desperate narcissist. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman read the verdict, the room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. On the count of securities fraud, guilty. On the count of corporate espionage, guilty. On the count of embezzlement, guilty. The list went on. Guilty on all 14 counts. The judge looked down at Stephen over his spectacles. Mr. Giles, you were given a position of immense trust. You used it to enrich yourself and attempt to destroy an institution that employs thousands. You showed no remorse, only arrogance. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for at least 20. As the marshals cuffed Stephen, he looked back at the gallery. He was searching for someone to save him. But there was no one. His friends had abandoned him. His mistress had testified against him. And in the back row, sitting quietly, was Victoria Fairchild. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded once, a gesture of finality, and then stood up to leave. Stephen screamed her name as he was dragged through the side door, but Victoria didn't break her stride. She walked out of the courtroom and into the sunlight where Arthur Pendleton and Mrs. Higgins were waiting with the car. It's over, Arthur said, opening the door for her. Yes, Victoria said, getting in. Now let's get back to work. We have a quarterly report to finish. 1 year later, the annual gala for Fairchild Holdings was held in the same ballroom where Stephen had tried to erase Victoria just 18 months prior. But the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no tension, only celebration. The company's stock was at an all-time high. The Fairchild Flow system had been updated and was dominating the logistics market. And the foundation, the one Stephen had tried to slander, had just opened 3 new schools in the city. Victoria stood on the stage, the microphone in her hand. She wore the same sapphire necklace, but this time she didn't look like a survivor. She looked like a conqueror. Tonight isn't about looking back. Victoria addressed the crowd of partners, employees, and board members. It is about the future. We learned a hard lesson this year. We learned that a company is not defined by the person who shouts the loudest from the corner office. It is defined by the integrity of its people. She gestured to the front table. Arthur Pendleton raised a glass. Mrs. Higgins, now the chief of staff, beamed with pride. Even Tiffany Snow was there, not as a guest, but working as an event coordinator for the catering company. She was rebuilding her life, starting from the bottom, earning her way honestly. Victoria had given her that recommendation. Leadership, Victoria continued, her voice ringing with quiet power, is not about taking credit. It is about taking responsibility. It is not about replacing people. It is about recognizing their value. Stephen Giles tried to build a kingdom on sand. We have built ours on rock. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't the polite clapping of fear. It was the genuine respect of a room that knew they were safe in her hands. Later that night, as the party wound down, Victoria stood by the window of the penthouse, her penthouse fully restored to its classic elegance. The orange paint swatches were long gone. Mrs. Higgins walked in with a cup of tea. "You should get some rest, Victoria," she said. "The board meeting is at 9. Victoria took the tea, looking out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. "I will," Victoria promised. "I just wanted to enjoy the view for a moment. It's much clearer without the shadow." She took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through her chest. She had lost a husband, but she had regained herself. She had faced the storm and found she was the lighthouse. Stephen was sitting in a 6x8 cell staring at a concrete wall. Victoria was standing on top of the world. The board recognized only one true leader, and she was just getting started. What a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how loud you can shout, but how smart you can fight. Stephen thought he could discard his wife like an old coat, but he forgot that she was the one who wove the fabric of the empire. Victoria didn't just win. She taught him a masterclass in strategy, patience, and dignity. She proved that you can't steal a throne from the queen who built the castle. So, what do you think? Did Victoria do the right thing by showing mercy to Tiffany and giving her a second chance? Or should she have let her go down with Stephen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.